Okay, hey, and welcome to another IC82 video. As you can see, I'm at the conservatory layout again today. This is a familiar sight to everybody, I'm sure. We've got the skirting board there, and we've even got the plaque on it again now, officially, thanks to my mates off Twitter, proclaiming it officially as the world's most famous piece of skirting board. I challenge you to find one that's more famous, I honestly do. And then we've got the outer loop just here, and then that's the inner loop, and then this is what's going to become the Lego loop. But there's a problem, which is going to be demonstrated by the Class 37 we've got just rolling up now. It's incomplete. There's this great big stonking gap in the middle of it. Originally it was a little bit smaller, and I did plan to put some points here because I was going to have a siding coming off and running down there, and then a whole load of sidings inside the two loops. But I can't do that anymore because the Lego layout, the Lego loop, which is eventually going to run all the way down there as well, ignore this curve, it will eventually run all the way down there straight and go all the way around, just like the two double O loops. Because of this Lego layout, I can't have anything in the middle now. Obviously I can't put some points there which are going to come and clash straight with the Lego. It's not going to work. And I've got to do the Lego because I've had literally hundreds, if not thousands of requests by now to do Lego train videos, such as the Emerald Knight, the Horizon Express, the cargo train, the passenger train, the Maersk train, loads of them. And so if I'm going to do those, I need a Lego layout. And seeing as a proper layout is being built upstairs, the whole conservatory thing might as well just become a testing area now. It might as well just be used for filming videos. So, I might as well plug up this gap and actually use it and use the loop again, because I can then run in two locos at the same time. I can do races, I can do a whole load of videos with two loops that you can't do with just one loop. So we need to plug this gap. Okay, so what things do we need to fill a gap like that? Well, obviously we need some bits of track. So that's a short straight. There's a, well, I think it's classed as a single straight, isn't it? There's a double straight. I can't remember if they're Pico or Hornby. This one is Pico and this one is a Hornby. Okay, we also need some rail joiners, or fish plates as they're also known. This little Pico track tool, this little spacing tool will come in handy. We need some track cutters by Xuron. I think that's such a cool name. It sounds like they're made by aliens. So these are the track cutters from the planet Xuron. And then we need some Flexitrack. And this is one gigantic piece of Flexitrack. It will totally not fit into shot, okay? It's huge, it's about 1 meter long. But we need one of those as well. So that's it, or is it? Isn't there one more thing we need? Yes, there is. Percy. Okay, well, Percy is great at hauling this little network rail train. Percy is network rail, literally. And the reason for that is because just having a locomotive with some wagons like this on another loop of track is so useful when you're working on a piece of track, because you end up with lots of detritus, lots of little bits of debris, bits of cut up metal, bits of cut up plastic, broken fish plates and stuff, and you can just dump those bits in the various wagons like I have done there. You see, this is just full of bits of metal, this is full of bits of plastic, well, sleepers and stuff, and then this is full of spare fish plates or rail joiners. They're basically the same thing. So yeah, thank you Percy. He's going to be very, very useful to us. Now the first thing we need to do is try and plug up as much of this gap as possible using what's known as set track. You could use Flexitrack if you wanted to, but I'm going to try and keep things as simple as possible today. And so we're going to use as much set track as possible. So for example, this is set track, that's a double straight. And then here we've got a single straight. These are basically the same length in Pico and Hornby and Bachmann, which is really, really useful, and it helps you to make dead simple layouts really, really quickly. So we're going to try and use those bits first, and we'll come to the Flexitrack in a bit. So I'm just going to grab my double straight here and connect it to this other double straight, which is just out of shot, like that. So you have to line it up, give it a good push, and it's in. And we're done. Fantastic. So now the gap is only this big. But this is where we have the problem. If I get the shorter piece of set track, which is a single straight, and it's the same length in Pico and Hornby and Batman, and I just rest it on the top like that, with the camera looking head on, you can see that this is actually too long. If I just take it off and I line it up perfectly like that, look how much we've got spare here. Look at that. It's a good, well, it's a good centimetre of rail. It's too big. It won't fit. It literally won't fit. And so we get out one of these tiny little pieces that are also done by Bachmann and Hornby and Pico. And although I think the Bachmann and Hornby ones are ever so slightly different in size. But if we put one of those down, you can see that that doesn't fit. That's way too small. And yes, I have tried even putting 3 of them down. One there, and one there. And they still fall short. We basically end up with a tiny gap there. So what are we going to do? Well, fear not. Flexitrack will come to the rescue. Here's our gigantic piece of Flexitrack, and this really is the model railroader's most useful piece of kit, if you ask me, because you can design and build anything with Flexitrack. The brakes are taken off. There are no limitations. You can design the layout of your dreams, and if you end up with a gap, which is an awkward size like this, just use Flexitrack to plug the gap, to fill that gap. If we just lay the bits of rail on top, just like that, and then I push them up ever so slightly, you can basically see that all we need to do is to cut the Flexitrack about here, and it will fit perfectly. Don't worry too much about sleepers at the moment and how it's going to look. We can tidy that up afterwards. The first objective is to just get that gap filled with rail, and Flexitrack is your best friend. So we need to make a cut in this Flexitrack. If I line up the end of the rail there and there, we need to make a cut just there. So after that sleeper. Now, because there's quite a lot of sleepers in this particular bit of Flexitrack, and this, as far as Flexitrack goes for plugging up gaps, this is quite a big gap. So because there's too many sleepers to count, you know, for example, if you were making the cut there, then you could just simply count it's the 4th sleeper along or something. But because there's quite a lot there, we're going to use a pen instead. So it's just a permanent marker, and all we need to do is to, again, line up the rail as near as possible. You know, get it as perfect as you can. Don't worry too much, because you do want a little bit of gap, because it makes such a nice sound when the train goes over it. So don't worry about the gap being present. A little gap is fine. And then we'll basically just go along, and we know that we need to cut the rail after this sleeper here. So I'm going to make a little mark on the rail, just there, and just there. And that's basically where we need to make a cut. Now, if it ends up that this particular section is a fraction too long, then we can just cut a little bit more off. And if it ends up that this section is a fraction too short, again, that little bit of gap isn't going to be a problem. Your fish plates, your rail joiners, which are these, they will make sure the electric conducts from piece to piece, and that gap will just make a lovely sound when locomotives and rolling stock go over it. So now we need to make that cut. Okay, now, before I make the cut on the piece of Flexitrack we need to make the cut on, I've got a spare bit here, just to show you how to use these thru track cutters. I'll stop doing that, it'll wear off eventually. So you take your thru track cutters, and you notice that, well, for a start, they're incredibly sharp, okay? They're incredibly sharp. They will easily take a finger off. So be very, very careful using them. And if you're underage, make sure you've got an adult around to help you. But you'll notice that they have a flat side and a not flat side. And there's a reason for that. And that's basically that the flat side leaves a nice, flat, flush edge, and the not flat side doesn't. That leaves a buckle. Watch. So basically you just get the piece of rail between the track cutters like that, And then because this is the flat side, this edge should be really nice and flat and smooth once cut. So you just grip it between the teeth, and then just with a really, really quick and hard cut like that, you can see that that is absolutely beautiful. That's how sharp and strong they are. Just one go, there we go, job done. Now, if I show you the not flat side, if I turn it round, watch what happens now. If I just push a piece of rail through, oh, I'm using the flat side again then, aren't I? So here we go, this is the not flat side now, and watch what happens. Now, it might be hard to see, but that isn't as flat. That particular bit is not as nice. Look at the two bits of rail there. Can you see those? Look at the difference. This is all nice and flat and perfect, but this is bent and buckled. Now, it's still possible, it's perfectly possible to continue using this piece of track. You can use it. It will go into a fish plate, just. It's not easy, but it will work. What I would recommend you do instead is to just use the flat side again and to take off the buckle. And there you end up with another perfectly flat piece of rail as well, along with bits of metal that have flown across the room and taken your nan's teeth out and everything. But you just have to get used to that. That's what track cutters are like. So basically what I need to do now is to do that to our piece of Flexitrack over there. Okay, so bits of metal are now all over the conservatory. It's going to be an absolute nightmare to tidy up, but we've got our piece of cut Flexitrack. Here it is. So that end's already got a fish plate on because it must have been used somewhere else in the layout before, in a past life. But if we look at the end we've cut, just look at that. Well, it's actually going to struggle to focus because it's trying to focus on the background. If I bring the camera away from the background, like that, yeah, that works better, much better. Look at that. Look at those ends. Absolutely perfect. They're perfect. That's absolutely beautiful. And if I test it out for length, if I get these bits of rail just perfectly lined up with those bits of rail, like that, and then drop this side in, like that, look at that. Perfect. Absolutely beautiful. We've got just a tiny gap at this end and a microscopic gap at this end, which is what you want. Just a tiny gap between the bits, basically. Absolutely beautiful. So now I need to put a fish plate on this end, but because we've got this sleeper in the way, we're going to have to remove that sleeper first, which means making a very delicate cut just through the plastic there and removing that sleeper. There we go. So we've got enough rail now exposed to put the fish plate on. So you just grab the fish plate and, oops, putting it onto the wrong one. There we go. So roughly about halfway. So that's it, the fish plate is on. You only obviously need a fish plate on one of them, and on the other end you have a fish plate there as well. Okay? And that is now ready to go into this gap. Give it a wiggle, give it a bit of a push, just make sure it's lined up as perfectly as possible. There we go. Okay, so there we are with our brand new, absolutely perfect piece of Flexitrack nicely in place. I'm just going to put some spare rail joiners into that wagon there, put these little bits of plastic sleeper which I cut off into the wagon there, and then I'm going to test the conductivity and the performance of our brand new section of track with the Class 37 by Bachmann, which is just going to roll over it now. Yeah, that's perfect. Couldn't ask for anything more than that. Right, okay, well we're nearly done, thankfully. The performance of this replacement piece of track is absolutely brilliant. It's spot on, which I can demonstrate again by just getting the Class 37 to roll over it. Here we go. Look at that. Fantastic. Absolutely perfect. But what about aesthetics? What about the way it looks? Have you noticed these gigantic gaps here between the sleepers, between the bits of track? That's not really very realistic, is it? Now, I don't mind because this is just a temporary layout. This is a conservatory layout. It's used for testing locomotives, it's used for video reviews. It doesn't really matter. But if this wasn't exhibition layout, and I was trying to get everything looking as realistic as possible, so I was using code 75 track, I was using electrofrog points and everything else, then I'd want these gaps to be filled. So how do we do that? Well, remember all those bits of sleeper that we cut off earlier that you don't need? Well, you basically take one of those bits of sleeper, or railroad ties as they're known in America, and you get your Xeron track cutters, and you basically cut off all the knobbly bits that you don't need, like this, because these track cutters will cut through anything. They're really, really useful. But be careful, obviously. You don't want to lose any fingers. So once you've done that, you end up with an almost perfectly flat sleeper that we can just push underneath there and then glue into place if this was a proper layout, you know. But there's a problem. Do you see those little knobbly bits on the top? Well, they have a name. In fact, they have so many names I've had to write them down. These little bits of plastic there, which hold the rail in place on the sleeper, or the railroad tie as it's known in America, they can be called rail anchors, tie plates, chairs, track fasteners, E-clip fastenings, or even tension clamps. As is typical with the world of railways, there's about 1 million names for the same thing. But they have to come off. Whatever you want to call them, they have to come off because they're in the way. And you can always glue little bits of plastic on again afterwards if you want to, but to be honest, I don't think it really matters. And so you have to basically get the Xeron track cutters into the tiny gap in the middle and basically just cut them off, just like that. It's really, really fiddly, but it is possible. And there we go. You will eventually end up with a flat sleeper or railroad tie, which you can just push underneath the gap like that, and then before you know it, your layout is going to look more and more realistic. If I just push this other one under as well. You see, that's only taken me seconds, and already it's adding quite a bit of realism to this particular section of track. Look at that. With a little bit more time and effort, that would look perfect. It's not perfect though, because there's still a little problem with the track being lifted up. Because you have the fish plates here, the rail joiners, well, if you can picture it in your mind, they are basically adding an extra millimetre onto the bottom of the track, which is going to push that sleeper down. So what you need really is to get a file, a really fine file, and basically file down in the middle where the two holes are, just like that, to allow for the fish plate. And you can't get any more perfect than that. I haven't got the time or the tool to do that today, but if you wanted it to be, I'm talking, you know, 10 out of 10, absolute perfection, then that is what you could do, and you would end up with one gorgeous piece of track. But for now, that will do me just fine.